Send me home. I can't do that.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse released 5 years ago. I gotta stop doing that to myself. I'm starting to feel it. The impact that Spider-Verse has had on comic book, movies, animation in general, the sales of ADHD medication from the visuals alone, it's crazy. I cannot overstate how much I loved Into the Spider-Verse. To this day, it remains one of my favorite movies of all time, whether it's the absolutely incredible animation, the fun and engaging plot, all that jazz. But for me, as someone who's loved Spider-Man for their whole life, I loved what Into the Spider-Verse had to say about the character of Spider-Man, what it means to be Spider-Man, focusing on the heart and soul of the Spider-Man, the consequences and hardships a character like Spider-Man faces, how no matter what, they'll always get back up, reaffirming that anyone can wear the mask, and that what makes you different is what makes you Spider-Man. It was refreshing to see a Spider-Man movie since the Raimi trilogy that not only understood the character, but loved it too. Throw all of these elements together into a film that's just the right length with little to no remaining fat, and you have yourself one of the best superhero movies ever made, and a strong contender for one of the best animated movies in general. So with the announcement of the sequel, Across the Spider-Verse, I was naturally excited. It's not very often that I feel an overwhelming sense of hype and excitement towards an upcoming movie. Living in this country does that to you. So to say this movie was important to me was underselling it. As mind-blowingly great as the first Spider-Verse was, it was hard to shake the nagging feeling of, oh god, what if this movie is mid? I mean, what if it ends up feeling bloated? What if it makes the film just a collection of Easter eggs on the level of, hey, I recognize him, that's Glup Shito Man. Oh god, the love triangle rumors involving Spider-Punk. You get it away, shoo. There was also the question of what this movie could possibly add to Spider-Man as a character, in a way that previous Spider-Man movies have not done yet, and make it unique to Miles Morales. I had a lot of questions, but ultimately a lot of faith as Lord and Miller were still on board. They haven't failed me yet, ignoring the times where they have, so as I sat down to watch Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, my mind was racing. And then the movie happened. I can't use that song, I'll get striked. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has shined a divine light into my jaded soul. As a sequel to one of my favorite movies of all time, it delivers and then some. In fact, in some cases it may over-deliver, but god damn. This is a good movie. Like, a really good movie. Not only does it up the ante with more stakes, a darker story, mind-melting visual spectacle, and filling every scene with so much heart, but it strikes a triumphant balance with its fan service moments too. There are plenty of cameos here, but they never take away from the actual focus of the film, and simply act as fun references and opportunities for quick gags, which is how stuff like this should be treated. If this movie was just a collection of scenes pointing at different brightly colored Spider-Men and going, ha, that's funny, then I would have been incredibly disappointed. You take these away and you're still left with an incredibly strong film, supported by relatable and compelling characters. The first hour of the movie actually contains a lot of emotionally authentic and human scenes. You've still got plenty of great and entertaining action, but the character writing is incredibly strong, focusing on their struggles with many shots lingering on them as they process their emotions. You can see them processing their thoughts with each expression. Subtle, but beautifully done. Miles is already a great character after the first movie, but Across dives straight into his frustration and conflicts with the people around him, telling him who he's supposed to be and how his life is supposed to go. Without getting too deep into spoiler territory, death and loss have traditionally played a massive part in every Spider-Man story across different mediums. It plays a huge role in Spider-Man's identity, so much so that the MCU Peter Parker had to have Aunt May die in No Way Home just to fix that core aspect of his character, literally being told by the two Spider-Men before him that he just has to accept that this is how things are and that Spider-Man has to always deal with the death of a relative. Into the Spider-Verse already did this with Uncle Aaron's death, but Across the Spider-Verse decides to toy and play with these core Spider-Man tropes and explores what makes Miles' identity as Spider-Man unique to him, putting him directly at odds with Miguel / Spider-Man 2099, who seeks to keep the fate of every Spider-Man absolute, ensuring that specific events must happen, playing right into Miles' existing conflict with everyone around him, intending to lecture him on who he's supposed to be and how his life is supposed to go. If Into the Spider-Verse's main goal was exploring what it truly meant to be Spider-Man and what makes your Spider-Man identity unique, Across the Spider-Verse is an incredibly meta but beautifully executed subversion of the expected tropes of Spider-Man stories, while still emphasizing what it actually means to be Spider-Man. To quickly get into spoilers here, skip ahead if you haven't seen the film. 3, 2, 1, okay? So in all of the marketing, a lot of us got the impression that Miles' dad, Jeff, was going to bite the dust in some form or fashion, playing into what we'd expect from a Spider-Man story. Miles has already suffered from the loss of Uncle Aaron and experienced that part of being Spider-Man, and the movie knows all of this, but one thing nearly every Spider-Man has gone through is the death of at least one one of their parents. And this is aptly described by Miguel as a canon event. It has to happen as part of their idea of what it means to be Spider-Man, as well as to also not cause the collapse of the universe it happens in if things change. But Miles sees things differently, and when faced with the knowledge that his dad is destined to die, he seeks to oppose that fate on his own terms, focusing on saving one person. And to go off of that line from the Into trailers, you can't think about saving the world, you have to think about saving one person. Obviously Miles wants to save the multiverse from destruction too, but by opposing the expected death of someone that we all expect would make him into a stronger Spider-Man, he has pretty much demonstrated what it means to be Spider-Man in his own unique way, and I think that's brilliant. Okay, spoilers over. I was not expecting all of the Spider-Gwen love in this movie. Gwen was a fun character in the first movie, but the first movie was solely focused on Miles and Peter B. Parker, with her playing a supporting role. Now, she played a much larger role in Spider-Ham, let's not get things mixed, but the film wasn't really about her. In contrast, the first 15 or so minutes of Across is completely dedicated to Gwen, and throughout the film, her and Miles get an equal amount of attention. But in Gwen's case, I was shocked at how effective many of her scenes were. Some of the most suspenseful and emotional scenes of the film come from a lot of the quieter moments in her story, and she feels like a much more fleshed out and interesting character coming out of this film. Whereas in Into the Spider-Verse, I was kind of indifferent. Her relationship with her father is tense and emotional. They really explore the impact that Peter's death really had on her, when in the first movie, it was just sort of brushed over as her Uncle Ben moment. And the romance between her and Miles, something I was incredibly wary of going in, was actually very believable and not incredibly overbearing. There is technically a hint of Spider-Punk making a love triangle with his inclusion, but it is nowhere close to being a huge plot point, and Hobie himself was one of the funniest parts of the film. How did you fit that mask on? But yeah, Gwen is great in this movie. She's easily one of the best parts of the film, and I'm super glad they gave her the spotlight she deserved. Miguel was surprisingly menacing, and his conflict with Miles was brilliant. I love how the entire time he's trying so hard to keep everything together, and then towards the end he goes full ape completely unhinged, but coming from a believable place and being a tragic character in his own right. Loved it. The plot has all of these characters, all of these emotionally driven arcs that challenge the conventions of Spider-Man stories, and none of it feels wasted or undercooked. Even characters like Peter B. Parker, who make their return from the first movie, while they don't exactly have an arc and don't really show up until the movie's close to wrapping up its second act, seeing how much they've grown since the first movie and finally giving Spider-Man fans a movie where Peter and MJ start a family was incredibly heartwarming, and his inclusion overall still feels necessary as Miles' former mentor, while providing a good amount of levity to balance out the darker tone. The movie is juggling a lot, so much to the point where it does feel a little bloated at points. Despite how much I adored the film's plot, towards the end I was definitely starting to feel the runtime a bit. It's a much longer film than the first, clocking in at nearly 2.5 hours. And if I'm gonna be honest here, while what happens in the last 30 minutes of this film is absolutely insane, ending on an incredible cliffhanger that leaves me immensely hungry for the second part coming next year, I feel like the film would have been a lot tidier if the last 30 minutes were reserved for the next film. I loved everything about the ending and everything it sets up. There's a ton of great ideas and scenes and a lot of suspense too, but instead of the cliffhanger just leaving me wanting more, it instead feels like the film is definitely incomplete and that these plot points were supposed to be part of the sequel, but were written into part 1 so that part 2 doesn't end up being insanely long. You could have ended the film on a cliffhanger about 20 to 30 minutes earlier and you still would have accomplished the need for wanting more, but with a much tighter script. Here, however, while the ending is exciting, it instead feels a lot more frustrating seeing as they set up a ton of new plot points with some incredible twists and then just don't pay them off. If the last 20 to 30 minutes of this film served as the beginning of part 2, instead of being what part 1 suddenly ends on, I probably wouldn't have heard several people in my screening mumble "what the f" in comedic unison. A cliffhanger is supposed to leave you wanting more, but here it felt like they were trying to be as show-stopping as possible by giving us a glimpse of what should have been the start of part 2. And well, mission accomplished, this ending is definitely shocking, but it results in the film being bloated. The first film didn't have as much to juggle around, and that's why it's a lot tidier in comparison. I also felt the Spot was just kind of forgotten about in the second half, which is upsetting because conceptually he's a really cool villain, and getting to see more of him would have been great, but I understood why he wasn't nearly as present in the second half. But when it comes to overall story critiques, that's really all I have. The story of the film takes the characters through a multitude of different dimensions, and this is why I love it when multiverse stories actually take advantage of the fact that they're multiverse movies, instead of just waving the concept around in the form of trite fan service. Looking directly at you, MCU, it's not even subtle. Spider-Verse uses the multiverse to push the medium of animation to its absolute limits, and even going far beyond what you could ever expect. Yeah, I'm talking about Spider-Verse's animation this late into the video, but that's because I wanted to highlight what's so brilliant about the film's story and characters, as a lot of bad faith critics tend to call Spider-Verse a case of style over substance, and it's only beloved because of how great it looks. But that's simply not the case. Spider-Verse tells some amazing character-driven stories and wraps them in a fun fun and engaging plot. And any chance I have to gush about the stories of these films, even though they're not without flaws, is one I'll gladly take just to counter this growing stigma. That being said, oh my god, this movie is gorgeous. Into the Spider-Verse was already a visually spectacular film. It was a film so incredibly striking with such a beautiful blend of 2D and 3D animation, as well as various other animation techniques, that it popularized a new wave of animated movies that are clearly inspired by its approach, but doing it in their own style. And this is easily one of the best things that happened due to Spider-Verse's mere existence. It allows for far more visually creative and out there projects that push the limits and expectations of animated movies, instead of them sitting comfortably in the hyper-realism that Pixar set the bar 4 years ago. But because this one film caused such a massive boom when it came to visual creativity in modern animated movies, the question remained: how could the sequel possibly top this? And I got my answer within the first 5 minutes. Across the Spider-Verse looks magnificent. While many scenes may be a lot more visually overwhelming than the first, every single scene of this film is a masterclass in animation, combining even more different styles of animation than the first with a variety of new techniques to let each universe pop. The neon comic book visual style is still as striking as ever, but everything from the lighting, the colors, the action scenes, god, some of the action scenes in this film consist of stuff you would expect from any other movie to have in its final act, much less its first two. This is such a beautiful looking movie, and I cannot sing the animation's praises enough. It is without a doubt some of the best animation and art I have ever seen. Like, just look at that. Look at that frame. The entire movie is full of this stuff. It tops the first movie by tenfold. Even stuff outside of the crazy multiverse action like the web slinging and the quieter character focused scenes are so captivating to look at, with some fantastic cinematography. I don't think any one shot is going to top the iconic levels of the leap of faith from the first movie, but there is not a single point in this entire film where I felt bored of what I was looking at. It's an absolute masterclass. In general, Across the Spider-Verse is not a perfect movie. It struggles with some issues like story bloat and criminally underutilized its most interesting villain, but the rest of the film is so mind-blowingly good that these issues, while they should still be noted and addressed, don't even matter when it comes to my overall enjoyment. I've not had a cinema experience quite like this in a long time, and now all that's racing in my mind is, where do they go from here? I had my doubts about this film going into it, mostly because I was scared it wouldn't live up to the legacy of the first, but I have full confidence that if Beyond the Spider-Verse ends up being just as great, or hell, even if it's just slightly not as good as this, then we might have one of the greatest film trilogies of all time on our hands. I'm incredibly excited to see what the Spider-Verse has in store for us next year, and I'm incredibly confident in saying that while Across the Spider-Verse is not a perfect movie, it's a perfect sequel to one of the greatest superhero and animated movies of all time.